Hi there, my name's Doug Ashlock, and today we're going to be talking about the VFR scenario from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Dallas, Texas. We're going to go watch the Vikings beat the Cowboys. However, one friend is a little apprehensive to go. One of them is really excited, raring to go, and has a lot of questions. How do you balance these two personalities and these attitudes towards flying, but still maintain safety of flight, getting from point A to point B safely? Well, on the ground is where you can prepare both for a lot of the scenarios and get a lot of the questions out of the way from either of your friends. For the one that's a little leery, AOPA has a really good article about this that basically, some of it is for children, but basically says early exposure can really help put nerves at ease for people that don't know what to expect. It's a fear of the unknown more so than the plane itself. Most people don't have an experience, so they don't know what to be afraid of, so they're afraid of the whole thing. So how we can limit this is early exposure, answer questions, show them around the plane in advance, and explain to them and answer for them any questions they have. And whenever you are flying, one of the techniques is a smooth takeoff. Smooth, gentle maneuvering, and the same for flying. You wouldn't want to be descending at 2,000 feet per minute, just diving for the runway. Or you wouldn't want to demonstrate your stall series or your accelerated stall, all this, cool fun stuff that you've been practicing, but, that's not what's going to appeal to them. I do have a person that I know that is adamantly against flying of any aircraft. They will not even get into a Southwest 737 because their very first experience with flying was just that. Their friend said, jump in this plane, let's go flying around. First thing that his friend did was take off and demonstrate power on, power off stalls and steep turns, and it just scared the crap out of this guy. And now he refuses to fly anything because his first experience with flying was horrible for him. So we need to avoid situations like that. We need to cater towards these gentle maneuvers to help ease these people into general aviation. So one of the ways that we can help answer some questions on the ground is showing your pre-flight plan. Now, maybe not necessarily fully in detail, but to enough detail that, number one, you can answer some questions from your curious friend, as well as you can show your apprehensive friend the real process that goes into flying a light twin. You're not just jumping in the car and heading on a road trip. You're preparing this. You're planning for this. You've checked how much would take to get there in time, fuel, and you've looked at why we're going this route. Is there terrain in between us and there? Are we going to go around it? Are we going to go higher or lower because of icing or wind conditions, things like that? Show them why we're choosing these processes so that they can kind of have an understanding of what's going on with the planning process of this. And that might be really cool for somebody who's interested in it, and very relieving for somebody who doesn't know anything about it. Ensure that they know about the concept of sterile cockpit. Now, having not been around general aviation, they may not understand this terminology, so make sure you explain it in lay terms so that they can understand it and why it's important. That's one of those, not when we're taxi, not when we're takeoff, not when we're landing. You're sitting down, you're buckled up, you're helping me look out the window, and when you explain to them why, it will help them get geared towards that general aviation safety mindset. when you're flying around, yes, your workload is reduced comparatively to the takeoff and landing portions. However, you still have work to do, but you can include them in this work. You might tell them, after you get an ATC handoff, why they do that. Explain the structure. Explain how come, this ATC person isn't going to track you all the way to Dallas. However, again, use terms that they're going to understand. And, hey, we're going to be looking at just this airspace. And that's what that controller's job is. And that's why they hand us off to another one to worry about just this airspace. Show them important things in flight. If I need help, I may ask you to pull out my checklist. I may ask you to read the checklist. I may ask you to look at these lights for me. If these, if I say gear down and these 3 lights don't light up, or one of them isn't green, let me know. And it's just another set of eyes on something to help you. And then you can ask them questions about things, how many this do you see? How many that do you want to know about? Hey, did you see the stadium where we grew up playing football together? Anything like that, you can point out and say, hey, did you see this? Hey, look, there's your house over there. Now, again, you're not neglecting your piloting duties, but, you still have to more or less entertain your guests and still fly the airplane. But if you make this intriguing for them, being intrigued by your inquisitive friend is really cool, but engaging your apprehensive friend will help take their mind off of, what if this happens? What was that noise? How come it was bumpy? And if they're looking outside, then they can kind of take their mind off of that. All right, so when you're landing, one of the things you can do is point it out to them. Say, hey, that's where we're going to land. Another thing you can do is point it out, or don't point it out, hey, I see where we're going to land. Can you find it? Or challenge them with the ATC instructions. Hey, they said this. What does that mean? What are we going to do? What can we expect to do? And then when you land, you might have them help you with odd instructions or helping you run that checklist again. Hey, read that. It says after landing over there on the checklist. Can you read that to me? I'm going to be configuring the airplane. Listening for odd instructions is helpful because, again, the same concept of 4 eyes are better than 2, 4 ears are better than 2 as well. Another brain on the radio listening to help you. They may not know what it means, however, they can tell you what they said. Pulling out your taxi diagram, not only is it a good practice, it's safe. Pulling out your roadmap, if time permits, show them, hey, the controller told me I'm going to go here, here, then here, cross here. They told me to cross. If they didn't tell me that, I wouldn't cross because it would be crossing a busy road without the walking green hand instead of the stopping hand. So this allows you to involve them again, to show them, hey, this is what that person said. This is what they mean. This is what they want me to do. All right. If you have any questions about systems, the scenario does mention that you should brush up on these. Now, personal experience has taught me just rambling on about systems isn't very engaging. However, a knowledge base of what to answer about when they ask it is more appealing. Hey, doesn't it get cold up there? Because I know that as you go up, the temperature gets colder. How do you stay warm? Well, that would be a good time to introduce how the heater is in this aircraft. For us in the Apache, it's in the nose cone of the aircraft. It uses fuel from the fuel tanks, and it actually has its own little engine. It actually has its own Hobbs and tack meter separate from the Hobbs and tack from the cockpit for the engines. So it's its own little separate engine that creates heat, and it's not similar to the single engine, where a single engine uses exhaust to heat up incoming air. This actually uses an engine driven heater. So hey, how come the pilots in these movies have to wear oxygen masks? Well, you might, you don't necessarily need to explain the regulation to them, However, you might say, well, at this altitude, I would put on oxygen because it's helpful with task management. This is where I'm required to do it. And the reason you might mention that is if you are not having enough oxygen in your brain, this hypoxia, again, they may not know the terms, but the concepts I'm sure they're familiar with. You explain to them, hey, I need oxygen to think. This is the order that will distribute oxygen, and here's why. That might make sense to them. But again, some of these things I wouldn't necessarily go straight into saying, hey, in the event of needing oxygen, well, why would I need oxygen? If that's not one of their questions, I wouldn't necessarily go straight into answering a question they didn't ask, unless it's relevant for safety. Yeah, we're not flying into ice in this aircraft. It's not certified for it. There's really not a lot of extra performance in this plane. It does have pretty good climb performance, but comparatively to other light twins, it actually doesn't. On a really nice cold day, it climbs at about 1,000 feet per minute with 2 engines, and right in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 feet a minute with single engine, and that's at sea level. Now, if we're going from Indianapolis, it might be a little higher. That's going to start becoming a problem with climb performance. Pitot-Static System, explaining how does this airspeed indicator work. You can explain to them that the pitot tube measures ram air pressure, the air coming into it, versus the static air pressure, just the passive air going by, and it measures the difference between the two, and that gives you your airspeed. The altimeter and vertical speed indicator just work on the passive static air, just where it is in the space up and down, and that'll explain it to a lay level. And then the emergency checklist, again, this is one of those critical items. If you need an additional hand, hey, flip to the emergency checklist. They're the red pages. We have our checklists on green and red pages. Green pages is normal operations, red pages emergency operations. If you're encountering a rough engine, the first thing to do would be to fly the airplane, but your passengers could have some concerns, particularly your apprehensive one. So what you need to do first is fly the airplane, and if you have the spare mental capacity to do it, reassure your friend, hey, don't worry about it yet. Let's run through some of these troubleshooting tips to try to clear it up first before we start panicking. Loss of oil pressure, again, this is one of those I wouldn't go out of my way to bring up unless they ask me specifically. But with an oil pressure issue, that's how your feathers, or rather your propellers, stay unfeathered. And if you lose that pressure, they will feather. So that's one of those, you need to understand how your system works, and that's one of those that I really wouldn't explain to them unless they ask. Engine fires on the ground during startup, our procedure is to keep cranking. If it doesn't start, you keep cranking. You turn your fuel selector off, which stops the flow of fuel to that engine, and then you continue to crank even though you shut the fuel off. So whatever little bit of fuel is left in the lines, yeah, you may feed that to the fire, but you're not continuing to feed it. And then you go mixture full rich, and then throttle full forward. Again, you're pushing that last little bit of fuel to that fire, and that's going to be in an attempt to stop that fire process, and an attempt to remove the fuel source, remove that piece of that triangle, so to speak. When you have an engine fire and you're able to get it started, what may happen is you just need to firewall the throttle to about 1,700 to 2,000 RPM, get that to try to suck back into the engine, and then do the mixture and mixture full rich, and then go to the fuel selector and select that to go off until the engine turns off. Either case, whatever you decide to do or whatever happens, you need to exit the aircraft and proceed to the rear, which gives you the most distance from that until you can regroup and say, okay, now let's move over here. If you have an engine failure in flight, or correction, an engine fire in flight, you're going to point that nose down. That's going to be one of the first things you do. You might blow the fire out. It's like the birthday cake candle. it goes out just because of the wind. That's what you're trying to do. You're gonna go fuel selector off and mixture full rich, full throttle. Again, you're gonna starve that fire. That's what you're attempting to do. And then attempt to secure the engine. If it's off, it may not. However, try. And then divert. If you need to, land off the airport. Don't try to go somewhere that you can't make it to in an attempt to try to save the plane. If you need to land in the middle of a field or on the side of a mountain, try to do that under power than stalled and spinning. If you have an electrical fire, you want to turn the master switch off. It has that real funny electrical smell, that burn smell. So turn the master off. The engines will continue to run because magnetos are separate from the electrical system. Fire extinguisher as needed. Open up all the vents and windows, everything possible to try to get fresh air in. What you want to do though is make sure that that fire's out before you start feeding it more oxygen. So you may make that situation worse if you don't. So make sure it's out before you do that. And then you're gonna, after you've gotten that out and you've opened it up, then you select all the switches, reset them essentially, put them in the off position, then turn the master back on. Right away, see if it represents itself. So if it's master on and all the other switches are off, you know it's the actual bus itself, not the individual pieces. If it's not, then you can turn on the essential items one at a time, and that will allow you to incrementally put your stuff back on to see if you can get a diagnosis of where it is. Because if it was your COM 2 and you can have your transponder and COM 1 on, you can still position, identify, and communicate with ATC, which is more useful than flying with all electronics off, which you're still in control of the airplane, but you're not talking to anyone and they really can't see you as well. All right, if the engine-driven fuel pump dies, your engine may sputter, it may even turn off, but we do have electric boost pumps. It's just a switch, just click it on, and it will help provide that redundancy. When using crossfeed, ensure that you don't accidentally turn off the fuel selector on the way to crossfeed. And you're gonna watch fuel consumption and be alert for leaks. Gear warning, there's gonna be some issues with gear warning. One of the warning signs is a gear warning horn, which just alerts you if you put your manifold pressure too low. You pull that throttle back and you don't have your gear down. It just alerts you that you don't have your gear down. But if you don't know what's going on, it could be alarming. Why is this sounding off? The gear position indicators are also available for visual reference. We have 1 orange light for the up position and 3 green lights for the down. We also have a gear mirror available to look to visually check to make sure the gear is down. Unfortunately, that's only on the pilot side, so the co-pilot or the other side, your passenger, wouldn't be able to look unless they just look in the shiny reflection of that engine. If you have a gear malfunction, there's a couple of things you can do. One of the things is try to reset it, retract, and redeploy. If not, then we have a hydraulic hand pump in the middle, because the Apache that I fly did not elect to have the electric standby hydraulic pump on the left engine, or rather on the right engine, and only has the hydraulic on the left. So if you lose that or something's wrong, you pull out that secondary hydraulic hand pump, pump it back up, and try to create enough pressure to push that gear down. If that doesn't work, or you notice that the gear's dangling and you might have a hydraulic leak or something along those lines, what you can do is we have a nitrogen charge, which is a handle underneath the carpet right in front of the pilot. Reach down, twist and pull that handle, an explosive charge of nitrogen pushes the gear out and locks it. That's a one-time only thing. If you do that, you have to have it serviced, but at least it gets your gear locked. Electrical system malfunction, advise ATC if you're able to, and turn off what you don't need immediately to see if that helps reduce that workload. If not, come up with a plan to divert, but the number one thing is fly the airplane. But if you're not able to talk, you don't really want to be flying into Dallas Class Bravo airspace when you don't necessarily have a transponder or radio. It may be much more worthwhile to put down in something like Wichita Falls, where there's not really anybody in that area. Yes, there's an Air Force base there, but they also have a general aviation airport. You can get some maintenance there. You're not in the busy class Bravo airspace without a radio. You have an alternator failure. We do have two alternators. One should pick up the load of the other one, but what you want to do is bring back that electrical load so you're not overstressing it. If both of them fail, then really restrict your electrical usage, because the only thing that's powering it is just how long you have left on that battery. Maybe just the transponder, just one radio. For me, one radio, I would use number 2 because it's like a Bendix King old school radio, and COM1 for us is a Garmin 430, which does draw a lot of power. So if I just need a Navcom radio to get into the Bravo and the transponder, it depends on where it happens also. If I'm in the Bravo, I'll let them know and try to expedite that landing. If not, I'll just inform ATC of diversion, because again, do you really want to go into this busy airspace with less than optimal capability? Spin recovery. This aircraft is pretty much just like every other aircraft. Use the PAIR acronym: power idle, ailerons neutral, rudder full opposite direction of the spin, elevator forward to break the stall, and then slowly recover from that dive. This is all, you do this all simultaneously. It's not one then the other, it's all at once. If a door opens in flight, you just fly the airplane. Put it down somewhere safe so that you can resecure it on the ground rather than trying to deal with it in flight. It's just safer and easier to just land and deal with it on the ground. If it doesn't latch on the ground, you're on the ground, you can probably get maintenance. You want to avoid overspeeding the propeller. Make slow descents under carefully managed power settings. That's key. You don't want to firewall everything and dive towards the ground unless you really, really need to get down and you're not worried about repairing your engine. You're worried about saving your life. Something along those lines. Carb ice in this aircraft will indicate a decrease in manifold pressure. The reason why is because we have a constant speed propeller, so it'll maintain the set RPM setting and it'll decrease manifold pressure until the engine dies. What we do is we apply carburetor heat. This hot, fully expanded air will make the mixture too rich. If you're going to leave the carb heat in, you might consider leaning the mixture so that it runs more efficiently. But the first thing that we'd want to do is just verify the presence of carb ice. So we would apply carb heat. We'd see a further decrease in manifold pressure and potentially in a rough running engine, followed by a steady increase. And then once we remove the carburetor heat, it should go back to the original RPM and manifold pressure settings. Then if you get recurring icing, then you can reset and lean appropriately. All right, so if we have asymmetrical flap deployment, one deploys and one doesn't, or one deploys at a different rate, or one deploys to a different setting than the other, then what we do is we go back to the last position where the flaps operated properly, or up, whichever is appropriate, and then maintain a pitch, attitude, and power setting known to give us a safe airspeed. So we're flying down, we put the flaps in, it's going to start to roll, you're going to counter it with ailerons and rudder, and you're going to put the flaps back where they were last. If that means they're up, then you're going to do a no flap landing. If it means you had them at half and you're going to put them all the way down and they decide to do this, put them back where they were. That could be something as simple as one is stuck and it can't protrude any further than where it is, so you can match it on the other side, or you need to bring it up because it's malfunctioned. If not, then you just fly the airplane. Always fly the airplane. So these are the references that I have for this slide, the AOPA slide, and the regulation in regards to oxygen 91-11, and then the Piper Apache operating handbook. Well, thank you for listening to my slideshow, and look forward to the next one. Thank you.